going on there, guys? Jay here with Tap and Turn Gaming again, coming at you today with another EDH deck tech. Today's deck is going to be for this card right here, Titania, Protector of Argoth. Now, when I play EDH, I generally do like to make multicolored decks just so I have access to, multiple different colors to, do multiple different things in the deck. I generally don't build too many monocolored decks. The only monocolored decks I have are my Tribal Soldier deck led by Darien, King of Keljor, and my Tribal Zombie deck led by Ghoulcaller Jissa. So those are both tribal decks. This deck for Titania is not really a tribal deck, but I just kind of have certain moments when I see certain cards in Magic the Gathering, and I see it and I read what it does, and then I just start brewing in my head. I'm like, how could I abuse this card? What could I do? How could I build a deck around this card that would make it really fun and really cool? So Titania was one of those cards where I saw it, and when I first looked at it, I'm like, well, you have to have lands die in order to do cool stuff. I generally don't want lands to die, but then I just started brewing in my head, how could I make that card good? How could I build a deck around it to make it fun and make it playable? So from there on out, I just proceeded to start building an EDH deck for Titania. And I think it came out pretty good. Basically, the overall strategy and purpose of this deck is to obviously get Titania on the board, and when she does get on the board, she'll bring a land back from your graveyard. But the overall theme of this deck is to actually sacrifice your lands away to get 5/3 elementals and then just overwhelm your opponent with those elemental tokens. So, I run a lot of fetch lands in this deck. Lands that will tap to sacrifice to, maybe destroy other lands, or, just fetch up basic lands just to trigger her ability, whatever it may be. So there's lots of lands in here that will allow me to sacrifice lands away, but there's also other cards, non-land cards in this deck that will allow me to sacrifice lands as well to trigger her ability to get elemental tokens on the board. Now, when I sacrifice those lands away, I do have many ways of getting them back, so it really does revolve a lot around Titania, this deck, but I think those are the best kind of decks. Decks that actually revolve around your commander card, and it's not just a deck led by one particular card, and then the rest of it's just filled with good cards from those colors. I really do believe that the best EDH decks are decks that revolve around your commander and synergize with your commander. Plus, it just gives it more flavor that way, I feel like. So, but yeah, so that's kind of the synopsis of my Titania, Protector of Argoth EDH deck. Now we're going to go into the deck tech on the deck, and I'll show you the cards in the deck and why I made, particular card choices, stuff like that. So stay tuned, and I hope you guys enjoy the deck tech for it. What's going on there, guys? Welcome to the part of the video where I'll go over the deck tech for my Titania, Protector of Argoth EDH deck. So first and foremost, let's take a look at Titania and see what she does. So she is a 5-cost, 5/3 legendary elemental creature. And when she enters the battlefield, return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So that's a pretty cool ability on its own. But what this deck is really built around is her second ability is whenever a land you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a 5/3 green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. So it kind of more or less brings like a copy of her, just without the abilities, because she is an elemental and she is a 5/3. So it kind of brings like her body to the party, but just without the abilities. So this deck is designed to abuse that ability and sacrifice lands and get 5/3 elementals on the board. Excuse me. So that's pretty much the overall big theme of this deck is to have your lands die and then turn those lands into 5/3 elementals, but I do have ways of getting said lands that die back to the board or to my hand or whatever it may be. So ideally, when I want to cast her is, if I have a land on the board that will tap to, search for a basic, maybe like a fetch land or an Evolving Wilds or something like that, you generally want to crack that to get a land, then cast her to have that land come back into play, because she'll resurrect a land from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then you can just reuse that land to get another land on the board and then get a 5/3 elemental out of it. So that's basically the ideal way to start the process of, killing your lands and getting huge elemental tokens out of them. So that's more or less what Titania does. She comes in, brings lands back from your graveyard to the battlefield, and whenever lands you control die, you get a 5/3 elemental creature to replace them. So that's basically what she does. Well, let's go into the rest of the deck tech on it, and we'll see how I actually do abuse that second ability on her. So first up, I have, the rest of the deck I have broken into categories, so it's kind of easier for me to talk about that way. And the first category is my land base, so let's take a look at that first. So first up are my non-basics. Here's Verdant Catacombs. It's one of the fetch lands from Zendikar. So, everybody knows what the fetch lands do. So the reason why I have these in this deck, yeah, it's a monocolored deck, but this will allow me to, I can play this, then I can tap it, pay a life, and sacrifice it to get a land on the board, and if Titania is on the board already off of this going to the graveyard, I'll get an elemental out of it. So, that's more or less why the fetch lands are in there, is because I can sacrifice them to get a land to replace them and get a 5/3 elemental if Titania is on the board. Same thing here with Wooded Foothills. Another fetch land, serves the same purpose in the deck. I can sacrifice it to trigger her ability, get a land on the board, and a 5/3 elemental. Same deal here. You'll see, kind of the same deal with a lot of these non-basic lands. So here's Evolving Wilds. Just not as good of a fetch land. It'll only let you search for a basic land and put into play tapped. The actual rare lands like the Verdant Catacombs and the Wooded Foothills will let you search for a land of a particular subtype, whether it be a forest, mountain, swamp, whatever. Obviously, I can only search for forests in this deck, but just the ability of being able to sacrifice those lands away is what I want, so I can trigger my commander's ability. But same deal here. I can play this, tap it, sacrifice it, get a basic land into play tapped, and then if my commander's on the board, I get a guy. So same thing here with Myriad Landscape. It can actually tap for 1, or I can pay 2 and tap it and sacrifice it to get 2 basic land cards that share a land type, put them on the battlefield tapped, blah blah blah. Just more means to trigger my commander's ability. Same thing here with Terramorphic Expanse. It's the same exact thing as Evolving Wilds. Grasslands, just a slower Windswept Heath basically. It comes into play tapped, but I can tap it and sacrifice it to search. Then I have the panoramas. There's the Naya Panorama. Serves the same purpose as all the other lands that can tap and sacrifice to search your deck. There's the Jund Panorama and the Bant Panorama. So those are more or less all my kind of like fetchy type lands, that I can sacrifice and, get a land into play and trigger my commander's ability. The rest of these are kind of, some of them kind of serve the same purpose, some of them don't, but they really do help the deck function. So here's Petrified Field. I can tap it for a colorless, or I can tap it and sacrifice it to return target land card from your graveyard to your hand. So, more means of triggering my commander's ability. I can tap this and sacrifice it to return another land from my graveyard to my hand. More or less, I'll probably just be, using this on itself, so I can either tap it for a mana if I need to, or I can tap it and sacrifice it to trigger my commander's ability, and then I can just return this from my graveyard to my hand, so I can, you know, keep doing that. So it more or less is kind of the same basis as all those other fetch lands, except that it doesn't actually fetch me a land out of my deck, it'll let me return one from my graveyard to my hand. But more or less I'll probably just be targeting itself, so I can keep doing that over and over and over. Here's Wrath's Edge. It taps for 1, or I can pay 4 and tap it and sacrifice a land to have this deal 1 damage to target creature or player. So, you know, more means of making my lands die to get dudes out of it if my commander's on the board. But, you know, the fact that this will, you know, ping something, you know, it's not bad. You know, if my opponent has like a 1 toughness creature on the board, I can potentially kill it with this. Or, you know, if someone's at 1 life, I can ping them with this land. So, you know, it's more or less in there for the land sacrificing, but the fact that it can deal damage isn't bad either. So here's Tectonic Edge. Taps for 1, or I can pay 1 and tap it and sacrifice it to destroy target non-basic land. Activate this ability only if an opponent controls 4 or more lands. So this is means of activating my, or triggering rather, my commander's ability and being able to blow up a non-basic land on my opponent's side of the board. So pretty good. Here's Gargoyle Castle. Taps for 1, or I can pay 5 and tap it and sacrifice it to get a 3/4 colorless Gargoyle artifact creature token with flying. So this card's pretty cool. It does cost a lot to trigger, or activate rather, its ability. But, you know, being able to pay 5, tap this, and sacrifice it to trigger my commander's ability and get a 5/3, and then I will get a 3/4 flyer off of this. So it kind of, you know, nets me, you know, double creatures that way. Next up is Ghost Quarter. I can tap it for 1, or I can tap it and sacrifice it to destroy target land, and then that land's controller gets to search their deck for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield. So again, more means of triggering my commander's ability, and I can use it to blow up lands that my opponents control. You know, if it's a little utility land that they're abusing, maybe like a Kessig Wolf Run, or, you know, Cabal Coffers, or, you know, stuff like that. You know, getting their utility lands off the board is always, you know, a welcome thing. Here's Haunted Fengraf. I can tap it for 1, or I can pay 3 and tap it and sacrifice it to return a creature card at random from my graveyard to my hand. So again, more means of triggering Titania's ability, and, you know, I can get a creature back from my graveyard to my hand. Yeah, it's at random, but, you know, being able to recur creatures is always nice too. And then more or less the rest of these lands are just nice little utility lands that I have in the deck. Here's Mystifying Maze. Taps for 1, or I can pay 4 and tap it to exile target attacking creature and opponent controls. At the beginning of the next end step, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. So, you know, kind of a weaker Maze of Ith, I suppose. But, you know, if I can use this to basically nullify one of my opponent's creatures that's attacking me that I don't want to hit me. Reliquary Tower, no maximum hand size, and I can tap it for 1, so that's nice. I do have a couple ways in this deck to draw a mass amount of cards. Here's Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. This was like a shoe-in for this deck. You can tap it for 1, or you can pay 2 and tap it and choose a color. Add to your mana pool an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. So your devotion is how many, you know, for instance in this deck it would be green mana symbols because it's a mono green deck. How many green mana symbols are in the mana cost of permanents that I have on the board? So, you know, if I have 15 green mana symbols among permanents I control in their mana costs, this can tap, I can pay 2 and tap this to get 15 green mana to my mana pool. So, you know, if you're playing a monocolored deck, this is like a shoe-in land for that kind of deck. But, I mean, even if you're playing, you know, maybe 2 colors, it could still be pretty effective. But so that's Nykthos. Here's Mosswort Bridge. It's the green hideaway land. When it comes in, you look at the top 4 cards of your library. You can exile one face down and then put the rest on the bottom of your library. It will tap for a green, or you can pay a green and tap it and play the card that you exiled with this without paying its mana cost if you control, if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater. It's very easy to do in this deck. All I need to have on the board is, you know, my Titania, my commander, and 1 elemental that she makes. And then I've just hit that stipulation. So it's a very easy stipulation to meet in this deck. Here's Oran Reef the Vastwood. It comes into play tapped. I can tap it for a green, or I can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So, you know, I do have ways to, you know, kind of rapid fire get 5/3 elementals on the board with my commander. So, you know, if I get a whole bunch of them on the board, and then I can tap this to make them all bigger. All the ones that came into play that turn. So, pretty cool land there. Here's Okina Temple to the Grandfathers. Taps are green, or I can pay a green and tap it to give target legendary creature +1/+1 till end of turn. I'm not sure if I actually run any other... Actually, I do have a couple of legendary creatures in the deck aside from my commander, so... I mean, this isn't like a super good card, but, you know, it's not bad. You know, it doesn't come into play tapped. It taps for my color, and, you know, I can use it, you know, maybe as a combat trick or to save a creature that someone's trying to destroy with damage, or, you know, make a creature live through combat, so it's not bad. And then the rest of the land base is just basic forest. So let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18 basic forests. So that's my land base. So as you can see, a lot of the lands in the deck will be able to trigger my commander's ability. And, you know, that's what I want to do. I want to trigger her ability many times throughout the game. So, the next batch of cards we'll take a look at are my artifacts. And first up is Ashnod's Altar. 3-cost artifact where you can sacrifice a creature to get 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. So, I do have some cards in this deck that will animate my lands into creatures, so having this in the deck will allow me to sacrifice those animated lands to get 5/3 elementals. So, plus, I really just do like this card. I'm a fan of sacrifice outlets, so, you know, this is one, and it will also net me mana, so I like it. Here's Zurin Orb. It's a 0-cost artifact where I can sacrifice a land to gain 2 life, so more or less in there just to trigger my commander's ability. But, you know, I gain some life off of it too if I sacrifice a land to this, so it ain't bad. Here's Conjurer's Closet, 5-cost artifact. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control and return that card to the battlefield under your control. I'll more than likely be targeting my commander with this card, just to re-trigger her enter the battlefield ability, where I can take a land from my graveyard and put it back onto the battlefield. So, you know, just a cool little card to trigger, or to re-trigger ETB abilities. And I do have, you know, a few other creatures in the deck with, you know, enter the battlefield abilities. So this is a nice little card to have in the deck to target creatures with such abilities to re-trigger them. Here we have Seer's Sundial. It's a 4-cost artifact with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 if you do draw a card. So, you know, I have lots and lots of ways to landfall this, whether it be, you know, just playing a land for the turn, or, you know, using Titania to get a land back from my graveyard. I have cards in here that will let me play multiple lands in a turn, so, you know, this will just get me straight up card advantage with this card, so pretty good in the deck. Here we have Gauntlet of Power, 5-cost artifact. When it comes into play, choose a color. Obviously, I'll be choosing green with this deck.
Creatures of the chosen color get +1/+1, and whenever a basic land is tapped for the mana of the chosen color, its controller adds 1 mana of that color to his or her mana pool. So it's essentially a mana doubler for me in this deck. You know, giving my creatures an Anthem effect is nice too, but more or less it's in there just to double my green mana. Yeah, it can kind of, you know, backfire against me if my opponent is also playing green, but, you know, just the things that I can do in this deck with all that extra mana is just, you know, it helps more than hurts. So, you know, that's that. That's Gauntlet of Power. Here's Caged Sun. It's kind of a weaker Gauntlet of Power. As it comes into play, choose a color, obviously green. Creatures you control the chosen color get +1/+1, and whenever a land's ability adds 1 or more mana of the chosen color to your mana pool, add 1 additional mana of that color to your mana pool. So I guess I shouldn't say it's a weaker version of Gauntlet of Power. It just costs 1 more mana to cast, and it only affects your stuff. So I guess I shouldn't say it's weaker. It's actually better. It's you know, 1 more mana to cast. So, but essentially it's just in there for the mana doubling. Here we have another mana doubler, Extraplanar Lens. 3-cost artifact with imprint. When it comes into play, you may remove target land you control from the game, and then that land becomes imprinted on this card. And then whenever a land with the same name as the imprinted card is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana to his or her mana pool for any type that land produced. So obviously, seeing as it says whenever a land with the same name as the imprinted card, so I never want to target any of my non-basic lands because you can only have 1 copy of any of those in your deck, but I will be targeting like basic forests with this. So, you know, I'll cast this, exile a basic forest, and then from there on out, as long as I have this on the board, all my forests, well, actually everybody's forest, so it kind of does work against you too if your opponent's playing green, but I just felt like I had to play this card in a monocolored deck where I do want to have a lot of mana acceleration. So exile a basic forest and it will double all the mana your forests generates. Okay, for the rest of my artifacts, we have Spine of Ishsa. It's a 7-cost artifact. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target permanent, and then when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return it to its owner's hand. Green has a lot of non-creature destruction, you know, for like artifacts, enchantments, even planeswalkers too. It doesn't have a lot of creature destruction. So I felt like I would put this in the deck just so I have access to some straight-up permanent destruction. So I do have quite a few ways to blow up artifacts and enchantments and stuff like that. Not a lot of ways to blow up creatures. So I felt like I had to put this in the deck just to have access to that if, you know, my opponent has a creature on the board that's really causing me issues. You know, this will be able to get rid of it. Or any permanent for that matter. And lastly, for my artifacts, one of the bomb cards in the deck, Crucible of Worlds, 3-cost artifact. You may play land cards from your graveyard as though they were in your hand. So this card was like a must for this deck when I was building it. So as you well know, as you've seen so far, I have a lot of lands in the deck that will be able to tap to sacrifice to do something. And then that will trigger Titania's ability, and I'll get an elemental 5/3 creature. Having this on the board is really, really nice. So if I sacrifice one of those lands away to trigger her ability, I can just take that land and cast it, or not cast it, but play it back onto the board if I have not played a land for that turn, or if I have one of my cards on the board that lets me play multiple lands in a turn. You know, this card is just so good in this deck. I just had to have it. It's a very expensive card. I think I paid about $27 for it. So, I mean, it is an expensive card, but I just felt like I had to have it in the deck just for what the deck does. So, that's Crucible of Worlds. Alright, so that is all of my artifacts in this deck. Next up, we'll take a look at my enchantments. And first up is Vernal Bloom. It's a 4-cost green enchantment. Whenever a forest is tapped for mana, it produces an additional green. So, you know, another mana doubler. I think I have like 5 of them in the deck. This also does help your opponents, again, if they are playing green, but, you know, I just wanted to have as much mana doubling in the deck as possible, you know, just to be able to, you know, ramp into things. So, you know, Vernal Bloom is very nice. But, you know, if your opponent's not playing green, it's not going to hurt you, so. Here's Exploration, a 1-cost green enchantment. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. So that's one of the cards I was talking about where I can play multiple lands in a turn. This is one of them. So, and it's very cheap to cast at 1. So, you know, I can play this on turn 1, and then on, you know, turn 2 I can play 2 lands, and now I'm already, you know, up that many, you know, 1 extra land on my opponent. So, very good card. Here's Parallel Lives, 4-cost green enchantment. If an effect would put 1 or more tokens onto the battlefield under your control, it puts twice that many of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. Mainly this is in here just so when I start abusing Titania's ability, I'll get 2 elementals instead of 1 every time. So, you know, it just doubles my tokens that I get. And my general produces lots of tokens. Here's Mana Reflection, basically another mana doubler, 6-cost green enchantment. If you tap a permanent for mana, it produces twice as much of that mana instead. Doesn't affect your opponent, only you, and it's whenever you tap a permanent. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a land. I don't think I have any mana rocks or any creatures that tap for mana in this deck, but, you know, if you had this in a deck and you tapped, you know, a mana rock or, you know, an elvish mystic or something like that, it would produce twice as much mana. So, very good card. Relatively expensive as well. And lastly, we have Burgeoning. It's a 1-cost green enchantment. Whenever any opponent plays a land, you may choose a land card from your hand and put it into play. So, pretty sweet card. Whenever one of your opponents drops a land, you can take a land from your hand and put it into play. So it's kind of like Mind's Eye in a way. It was the only card I could think of that's kind of similar to it. But instead of, you know, paying 1 if your opponent, you know, one of your opponents draws a card, you can pay 1 off of that to draw a card. Just whenever an opponent plays a land, you can put a land from your hand into play. So very nice. Okay, those are my enchantments. Next up, we'll take a look at my spells, my instants, and sorceries. And I believe first we'll take a look at my instants. And here they are. And the first one is Natural Affinity. It's a 3-cost green instant. Until end of turn, all lands become 2/2 creatures that are still lands. So I like this card because I can cast it at instant speed. It does affect all lands in play, but, you know, I can use this to, you know, at instant speed, animate all my lands and try to alpha strike somebody with my lands and, you know, any 5/3 elementals that I have. Granted that your opponent's lands will also become 2/2 lands. So, I mean, you can kind of use it as like a high risk, high reward kind of card where, you know, you could see if your opponent wants to have all their lands trade with all of your lands, you know, and then it kind of just puts everybody back to a state where they don't have that many lands on the board. You know, and my commander will allow me to resurrect lands. So, I mean, it can potentially set you back, but in this deck I feel like it wouldn't set you back for too long. But, you know, I can also use this to animate lands and then sacrifice those lands to maybe an Ashnod's Altar or, you know, something else that allows me to sacrifice lands, maybe like a Zurin Orb or something like that or whatever, you know, to get 5/3 elementals instead of it being a 2/2. So, you know, it's an interesting card. I'm not actually really sure. You know, it kind of depends on the stipulation, I suppose. So, I mean, I felt like it was a really cool card because it's an instant, and you could potentially use it to alpha strike your opponent. More or less, I kind of liked it just for the fact, oh, well, if I animate all my lands into 2/2s and swing with them all, you know, if will my opponent use their lands to block my lands and set themselves back? So it's kind of just like a little interesting card that I thought would be pretty cool to have in the deck. Here's Chord of Calling. It's a 3-cost green instant with an X cost, and it has Convoke. Basically, what Convoke is, for those of you that do not know, each creature you tap while casting a spell reduces its cost by 1 or 1 mana of that creature's color. So, you can pay green and then tap, 5 creatures to fetch up a creature with 5 or less casting cost and put it right into play. So that's more or less what this does. It has Convoke and search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost extra less, put it onto the battlefield, and shuffle your deck. So, being able to, at instant speed, rip a creature out of your deck right into play is really nice. The fact that you can Convoke it is even better. Here's Harrow. It's a 3-cost green instant. Basically a mana ramp spell, but the reason why I like it a lot is an additional cost to cast it, sacrifice a land, so that will trigger my commander's ability if I have her on the board. And then search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So mana ramp and triggering my commander's ability all in one card. Really nice. Here's Realms Uncharted, another 3-cost green instant. Search your library for 4 land cards with different names and reveal them. An opponent chooses 2 of those cards. Put the chosen cards into your graveyard and the rest into your hand, then shuffle your library. So, I can fetch up, or search, rather, for like 4 of my kind of fetchy type lands and reveal them. My opponent will pick 2 of them. Those 2 will go to the graveyard, and the other ones will go into my hand. I mean, that's okay that the other 2 go to my graveyard, because my commander can reanimate lands from my graveyard onto the battlefield when she comes in. So, pretty cool card. Here's Constant Mists. It's a 2-cost green instant with buyback of sacrificing a land. So, that's cool that I can use this card to re-trigger my commander's ability. But it's basically a fog. Creatures deal no combat damage this turn. So it's essentially a fog with buyback of sacrificing a land. So, I can keep reusing it constantly. Constant Mists. I see what they did there. Yeah. But, pretty cool card for this deck. A reusable fog, and I can also buy it back by sacrificing a land, which will trigger my commander's ability. So just fit very well into the deck. Here's Beast Within. 3-cost green instant, destroy target permanent. Its controller gets a 3/3 green beast creature token. So, like I said before, with Spine of Ishsa, green has a lot of ways to blow up artifacts and enchantments or non-creature permanents. Not a lot of ways to destroy creatures, so this is just another card where I can use it to blow up an artifact, enchantment, or a planeswalker, or land, or whatever. But more or less I had this in there for the ability to blow up creatures. But it's any permanent, so yeah, the opponent gets a 3/3 green beast, but I'll gladly cast this on an opponent's, Shieldred or something like that, to get that off the board and give them a vanilla 3/3 green creature. So that's Beast Within. Here's Crop Rotation. It's a 1-cost green instant. As an additional cost to cast it, you have to sacrifice a land. And search your library for a land card, put that land into play, then shuffle your library. So more or less just more ways to trigger my commander's ability. Kind of like a Harrow. Just, it costs less, but it only lets you fetch up 1 land. But it's any land, it's not a basic land, so that's pretty cool. Here's Far Wanderings, a 3-cost green sorcery. We're into the sorceries now, by the way. Search your library for a basic land card, put that card into play tapped, then shuffle your library. And if you have Threshold, which is if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, instead search your library for 3 basic land cards and put them into play tapped. So, at its base, it's a 3-cost spell that will get you a basic land into play tapped. If you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, it will get you 3 lands, so pretty cool. Here's Genesis Wave. What green deck would be complete without Genesis Wave? I love this card. 3 green and X for a sorcery. Reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put any number of permanent cards with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield. Then put all cards revealed this way that weren't put onto the battlefield into your graveyard. If you're playing green, play this card. Please, for the love of God, if you don't play Genesis Wave in a deck that you have that's green, you should, because Genesis Wave is just ridiculously good. And it helps to have all the mana doublers that I have, so I can make that X cost even bigger and just flip into tons and tons of cards and just put them straight into play. Generally, if you cast Genesis Wave for a very large amount, you're probably going to win the game very soon, so that's Genesis Wave. If you play green, play this card. Here's Cultivate, 3-cost green sorcery. Search your deck for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, and put one onto the battlefield tapped, the other into your hand. So basically like a Kadama's Reach. Well, it does the same exact thing, it's just called Cultivate instead. Here's Life from the Loam, a 2-cost green sorcery. Return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. So, you know, if I'm using my lands to sacrifice away to trigger my commander's ability, I can cast this to get some of those lands back and then replay them and then sacrifice them again. It also does have Dredge 3. So basically what that is if you would draw a card, instead you may put exactly 3 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand, otherwise draw a card. So I can, you know, mill myself for 3 to get this card back from my graveyard to my hand to reuse it. So, pretty cool. Here's Rude Awakening, a 5-cost green sorcery. Choose one, untap all lands you control, or until end of turn, lands you control become 2/2 creatures that are still lands. And it's got that nice little entwine cost for 2 and a green. So if you pay the entwine cost on this card, in addition to paying its mana cost, you get to choose both of these things. So it's a pretty cool card for this deck. You know, it costs more than Natural Affinity, but it's a sorcery instead of an instant. But it only affects my land, so I can, you know, potentially use my lands that I have on the board to just get in that extra damage and Alpha Strike. So it's a pretty cool card for this deck. Here's Regrowth, a 2-cost green sorcery. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Pretty basic. Just take any card from my graveyard back to my hand. Here's Skyshroud Claim, 4-cost green sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 forest cards and put them into play. Then shuffle your library. So, you know, it costs a little more than most of these types of spells at 4, but it lets me search for two forests and put them into play. So, pretty cool. And here is Cultivate's brother, Kadama's Reach. Basically does the same exact thing as Cultivate. It costs 3, it's a sorcery. Search your library for 2 basics. One goes onto the field tapped, the other goes into your hand. Here is Creeping Renaissance, a 5-cost green sorcery. Choose a permanent type. Return all cards of the chosen type from your graveyard to your hand. So, you know, if I sacrifice a lot of lands away, I can cast this to get all those lands back. If I choose lands as a permanent type, I can get all my lands back from my graveyard to my hand and then start replaying them and triggering my commander's ability more. And it also has flashback for 5 and 2 green, so you can cast this from your graveyard for its flashback cost. Most of the time I'll be picking lands as the permanent type on this, depending on how many are in my graveyard. But, you know, if I have maybe some creatures that I want to get back, or artifacts, or enchantments, you know, it lets you choose any permanent type. So, pretty cool card. And lastly, Sylvan Scrying, a foil Sylvan Scrying, so that's pretty nice. 2-cost green sorcery, search your library for a land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. So pretty basic there. Alright, so those are my spells, my instants and sorceries of the deck. Next up, we'll take a look at the 3 Planeswalkers that I play in this deck. And the first one is Nissa Worldwaker. She is a 5-cost green planeswalker that comes into play with 3 loyalty counters. Her first ability is +1, target land you control becomes a 4/4 elemental creature with trample. It's still a land. Then her next one is another +1, untap up to 4 target forests. I'll probably be activating that more than any of these other abilities just to get that additional mana ramp. Then her last ability is -7, search your library for any number of basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Those lands become 4/4 elemental creatures with trample, they're still lands. So, you know, she'll animate your lands into 4/4s that you can beat face with. She'll untap up to 4 forests, and she'll allow you to kick off her ultimate and then fetch up any number of basic lands out of your deck and put them into play, and then they become 4/4s with trample. So you kind of have to be careful when you play this card, especially in Commander, because unless you're going to use like that last ability, if you're going to use that to alpha strike your opponent, you better hope that they don't have like a Wrath of God or, you know, something like that in their hand that they're going to cast on their turn, which will blow up all the lands you just animated. But, you know, if they do that and you have your commander on the board, you'll just get that many 5/3s, but, you know, all your lands will be dead. But I guess, you know, it wouldn't be too bad of a thing, because if they did do that, you would get that many 5/3s onto the board off of everything dying, and then, you know, they wouldn't have any creatures either. So, I mean, I guess it could hurt you, it could, you know, wind up helping you as well, but most of the time I'm just going to be activating that middle ability to untap forests and reuse them for the mana. So, that's Nissa Worldwaker. Here is Freyalise Llanowar's Fury. She's another 5-cost green planeswalker that also comes in with 3 loyalty. Her first ability is +2. Put a 1/1 green elf druid creature token onto the battlefield with tap it, add green to your mana pool. So she essentially makes Elvish Mystics with her +2 ability. So that's pretty cool. Being able to get dudes on the board that can, you know, ramp your mana is nice. Her second ability is -2, destroy target artifact or enchantment. So that's very nice. Being able to blow up artifacts and enchantments that may be causing you issues is nice. Then her last ability is -6, draw a card for each green creature you control. So she can potentially draw me boatloads of cards depending on how many green creatures I have on the board. So, I mean, she was one of the cards from the Commander precons for this year, or I guess I should say last year, but you know, she's got that little clause on the bottom of her that she can be your commander of your deck, because she was, you know, from the new Commander set there. She was in the mono green deck, so she's not my commander. Titania is my commander, but she has the ability to be your commander if you so choose to do so. But she's just one of the 99 in my deck, and she's very, very good. And lastly, we have Garruk Wildspeaker, the original Garruk. He's a 4-cost green planeswalker with 3 loyalty. His first ability, +1, untap up to 2 target lands, so kind of like, you know, Nissa Worldwaker, just doesn't untap as many, but it's any 2 lands, not just forests, but in this deck it doesn't really matter. His second ability is -1, you get a 3/3 beast onto the battlefield, and then his ultimate is -4, and you get overrun, basically. All your creatures get +3/+3 and trample, so he's pretty cool. If you get a lot of elementals on the board with your commander and you can activate his ability, you can just swing away with them and probably do lots of damage. Alright, so those are my 3 planeswalkers. Lastly, we will take a look at the creature base of my deck. I actually have them broken into how much they cost. So, first up we have Uvenwald Tracker, a 1-cost 1/1 green creature where you can pay 1 and a green and tap him. Target creature you control fights another target creature. So I felt like I had to have this guy in the deck because green doesn't have a lot of access to creature destruction. So, you know, I can use this guy to use one of my 5/3 elementals that I make off of my commander to probably kill another creature, because they'll fight. My elemental will deal 5 damage. Not many creatures will survive 5 damage, so he's pretty solid, or yeah, he's pretty solid creature destruction. Or creature removal, I should say. Here's Sylvan Safekeeper, a 1-cost 1/1, sacrifice a land, target creature you control gains Shroud until end of turn. So this is really nice to have on the board when your commander's also on the board. So, if someone tries to, cast a kill spell on her or something like that, you can sacrifice a land to give her Shroud, and then off that land dying, you'll get a 5/3. So, pretty nice. Here's Groundskeeper, a 1-cost 1/1 where you can pay 1 and a green to return target basic land card from your graveyard to your hand. So, if I sacrifice some of my basic forests away to some type of an ability that I have in the deck to trigger Titania's ability, I can pay 2 off of this guy to get it back to my hand. So, that's pretty nice. Here's Sakura Tribe Elder. Everybody knows what this guy does. 2-cost 1/1, sack him, get a basic land, and put it into play tapped. Here is Budoka Gardener, a 2-cost 2/1 where you can tap him. You may put a land card from your hand into play. If you control 10 or more lands, you flip him. And if you do so, he becomes Dokai Weaver of Life, where he is a 3/3. Legendary Human Monk, and you can pay 4 and 2 green and tap him to put an XX green elemental creature token into play, where X is the number of lands you control. So I thought he was pretty cool. He'll tap to let you shoot out additional lands, and if you do flip him, he makes elementals, which your commander also makes. So I felt like he was pretty cool for the deck. So that's Budoka Gardener, or if you flip him, Dokai Weaver of Life. Next up is Courser of Crewfix, very heavily played card in Standard, but works very well in this EDH deck. A 3-cost 2/4. Play with the top card of your library revealed. You may play the top card of your library if it's a land card, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. So I do have lots of ways to play, multiple lands in a turn. So, having this guy, yeah, he does give your opponent that information of what your top card of your deck is at all times when he's on the board, but just being able to shoot out extra lands with him, or, if you're missing a land drop and you cast him and your top card is a land, well, you can put it into play because he lets you do that. And he gains your life for every land that comes into play under your control, so he's just overall really good. Here's Eternal Witness, 3-cost 2/1. Everybody knows what this does. When she comes in, you take any card back from your graveyard to your hand. Green staple right there. Here is Yavimaya Elder, 3-cost 2/1. When he is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put them into your hand. If you do, shuffle your library, and then you can pay 2 and sacrifice them to draw a card. So, he'll come in. He won't do anything when he comes in, but you can pay 2 and sacrifice him to draw a card, and then that will trigger his ability of allowing you to search for 2 basics, I believe. Yes, 2 basics, put them in your hand. So, pretty cool. Here's Reclamation Sage, 3-cost 2/1. When he comes in, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Pretty basic there. Here is one of the money cards that I have in the deck, Azusa Lost But Seeking, 3-cost 1/2, Legendary Human Monk. You may play 2 additional lands on each of your turns. So she's very nice to have on the battlefield. You can start, just ramping out lands out of your hand straight into play. So, I do have a lot of ways to fetch up lands from my deck, search, put 1 into play and the other into my hand. So if you have this on the board, it'll essentially let you put both into play. So she's very, very nice. Here's Teamer Sabertooth, a 4-cost 4/3, where you can pay 1 and a green. You may return another creature you control to its owner's hand. If you do, Teamer Sabertooth gains indestructible until end of turn. If any of you saw our Fate Reforged kind of pre-review, we didn't mention this card in the batch of cards that we really liked. But once I saw this card, I must have skipped over it when looking at the cards in the set. This card's really good. I really like this card. I feel like it should be a rare. I can use this to, if someone tries to kill my commander, I can use this in response to bounce my commander to my hand, and then this will gain indestructible. Or, if someone goes to do a board wipe, if I have that green mana or the mana available, I can activate this multiple times and, you know, save some of my creatures, get them back to my hand, and then this will get indestructible and not die from a board wipe. So, you know, he's really good with creatures with enter the battlefield abilities. You know, you can use this, bounce it to your hand, and then you can recast it, and then he'll become indestructible until end of turn. I really feel like this should be a rare. It's an uncommon, but it's a really, really good uncommon, I feel like. I think it should be a rare. Anybody else who thinks so, leave a comment in the comment section below the video and let me know if you think Temur Sabertooth should be a rare as well, because I think it should. Hey, here's Polukranos World Eater, 4-cost 5/5, Legendary Hydra, with Monstrosity X for green and double X. So basically what Monstrosity is, if this creature isn't monstrous, put X +1/+1 counters on it and it becomes monstrous. For those of you that don't know how the double X works, basically whatever you pay for X, it cuts it in half. So if you pay 6 for X, you'll essentially get 3. If you pay 8, you get 4. If you pay 10, you get 5. That's basically how that works. So if you dump 10 into the X cost on this, he'll get 5 +1/+1 counters. But I do have a lot of mana doubling in this deck, so I felt like he was pretty solid creature removal. So when he becomes monstrous, it deals X damage divided as you choose him in among any number of target creatures your opponents control. Each of those creatures deals damage equal to its power to Polukranos. So more often than not, he'll probably die when you do make him monstrous, but he is very solid creature removal. Plus, you can divide the damage, so I felt like I had to put him in the deck just for more creature removal access. Here is Oracle of Moldiah, 4-cost 2/2. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Play with the top card of your library revealed, and you may play the top card of your library if it's a land card. So kind of similar to Courser of Krufix, but he lets you play additional lands, and you know, he lets you... Courser of Krufix doesn't let you play additional lands, he just lets you play lands from the top of your deck if it's a land. So if you already played a land for your turn, if the top card of your deck is a land with Courser of Krufix, you can't play it, but this card will let you do it, so very good card. Here is Squirrel Wrangler, a 4-cost 2/2, where you can pay 1 and a green, sacrifice a land to get 2 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens into play, or you can pay 2 1 and a green, sacrifice a land, all squirrels get +1/+1. More or less this is in here for the ability to sacrifice lands to trigger my commander's ability, but being able to sacrifice lands to trigger that ability and get 2 1/1s ain't bad either. I can also, you know, sacrifice a land to pump all my squirrels +1/+1, but probably won't be doing that too often. It'll more or less just be the first ability there. Okay, next up we have Baru, Fist of Krosa. He's a 5-cost 4/4 legendary human druid. Whenever a forest comes into play, green creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your forest, it can be your opponent's forest. So if your opponent plays a forest, he'll pump all your green creatures +1/+1 and give him trample. He does have Grandeur, which was an ability from Future Sight. It's not at all effective in Commander because you have to discard another card named him, or named Baru, Fist of Krosa. So you'll never trigger this because you can only have one copy of this guy in your deck, but I'll just read what it does. Discard another card named Baru, Fist of Krosa, put an XX green worm creature token into play where X is the number of lands you control. So that's pretty cool if you're, you know, playing this in like a 60 card deck with multiple copies, but more or less I have him in there for whenever a forest comes into play, all my green dudes get +1/+1 and get trample. So, you know, I can abuse that with my general on the board by sacrificing lands, you know, fetching up a forest, getting a 5/3 out of it, and then that 5/3 will become, you know, a 6/4 with trample, and then if I do it multiple times, it'll keep stacking, so pretty cool card for the deck. Here's Seedborn Muse, a 5-cost 2/4, untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. Really good card. You know, all your stuff untaps on everybody else's turn, and of course still on your turn, so, you know, gives you access to all your stuff on everybody else's turn as well. So, pretty cool. Here's Acidic Slime, 5 cost 2/2 with Death Touch. When he comes in, blow up an artifact, enchantment, or land. I play that in every green deck I have. Here is Jolreel, Empress of Beasts, a 5 cost 3/3, where you can pay 2 and a green and tap it to discard 2 cards until end of your turn, or until end of turn. All lands target player controls are 3/3 creatures that are still lands. I am very wary of animating lands just in fear of my opponent having like a board wipe or something that they can somehow cast at instant speed, on my turn, but, I put this in the deck just because, I could potentially use this to alpha strike somebody if they're not expecting it. So, I can target the player whose lands become 3/3 creatures, so, I could potentially, if I had access to some type of board wipe, I could pay 3, discard 2 cards to make my opponent's lands 3/3 creatures and then cast a board wipe, but obviously can't do that in a mono green deck. But, I will animate my lands with this, obviously. I could potentially alpha strike with those lands, or I can use them to trigger my commander's ability now that they're creatures, and I can sacrifice them to maybe like an Ashnod's Altar or something like that. So, it's a pretty cool card. I like it. I'll probably more often than not, I should say, use it to try to alpha strike somebody and just overwhelm them with a bunch of creatures. Next up is Genesis, a 5 cost 4/4. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Genesis is in your graveyard, you may pay 2 and a green. If you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Really good card. Very, very solid creature recursion on this guy. So if you somehow get him into your graveyard on each of your upkeeps, you can pay 2 and a green and get a creature back from your graveyard to your hand. So that's very good. Here's Ambush Commander, a 5 cost 2/2. Forests you control are 1/1 green elf creature token, green elf creatures, not tokens, green elf creatures that are still lands. And you can pay 1 and a green to sacrifice an elf. Target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. Again, this will animate all my lands permanently, but I'll probably never cast this guy unless I'm trying to alpha strike somebody in that turn. So, I'll cast him, it'll animate all my lands into 1/1 elves, and then I can sacrifice, those elves that are my lands by paying 2 and sacrificing 1, which will trigger my commander's ability, but also give a creature a +3/+3. So, more or less, this is in here to try to kill somebody in one turn when I cast it. So, he's pretty cool. Next we have Rampaging Baloths, a 6 cost 6/6 with Trample, which ain't bad on its own. And if you landfall, you get a 4/4 green beast. So, enough said about that. It's a really good card. Here's Kamal, Fist of Krosa, 6 cost 4/3, where you can pay 1, target land becomes a 1/1 green creature until end of turn, it's still land, or you can pay 2 and 3 green and overrun. Creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain Trample. Most of the time I'll probably be activating that ability, but, being able to animate a land into a 1/1 creature that I can potentially sacrifice away to, like an Ashnod's Altar or something like that to trigger Titania's ability is also, nice as well to have that option. Next we have Avenger of Zendikar, a 7 cost 5/5. When he enters the battlefield, put a 0/1 green plant creature token on the battlefield for each land you control. And if you landfall, you put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. So, if you have 10 lands on the board and you cast him, you get 10 0/1 plant tokens. And every time after that a land comes into play under your control, those plants get a +1/+1 counter. So, he's really good. Here's Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger, or as in my play group we call him the Klex. He's a 8 cost 7/6 with Trample. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. So he is another mana doubler for just me. And whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during its control's next untap step. So he's very mean. He's a very mean card. Most of the time in my play group, when anybody plays this guy, he gets a big red bullseye on him and he gets targeted. So he doesn't stay on the board very long generally in my play group, but he's very, very good. He'll double my mana, and whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, it won't untap during their next untap step. So that's the Klex. He's really good. Next up we have Liege of the Tangle, an 8-cost 8/8 with trample. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you may choose any number of target lands you control and put an awakening counter on each of them. Each of those lands is an 8/8 green elemental creature. For as long as it has an awakening counter on it, they're still lands. Most of the time I probably won't be activating that ability. He's basically just in here as a 8/8 with trample, so he's just a beater for me. But, you know, if I excuse me, if I so choose to animate, you know, any of my lands when he hits a player into 8/8 elementals, you know, if I somehow know that my opponent maybe doesn't have a Wrath in their hand to just wipe out all my lands on my next turn, you know, I can probably Alpha Strike them if I animate all of my lands into 8/8s. So, I mean, but then again, I guess, you know, if you have your commander on the board with this guy and you animate all your lands into 8/8s and then it goes to your opponent's turn and they board wipe, all your lands are just going to become 5/3 elementals off of your commander with that ability triggering multiple times. So it may make your opponent think twice about board wiping if you do that, because, you know, all their creatures are going to die, all your creatures are going to die. All your lands are also creatures, so they're also going to die, but off of all those lands dying, it's going to trigger Titania's ability a bunch of times, so it may make your opponent think twice about casting a board wipe. And lastly, we have Terracodon, an 8-cost 9/9. When he enters the battlefield, you may destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents, and then for each permanent destroyed this way, its controller gets a 3/3 green elephant creature token. I'll gladly give someone a 3/3 green elephant to blow up their Debtor's Knell or their, you know, Lux Cannon or their whatever. You know, as long as it's, you know, their Planeswalker, their Elspeth Tyrell, their, you know, whatever. As long as it's not a creature, it will blow it up, and then they get a 3/3 green elephant. So it's a very fair trade-off to destroy a big threat and give them a vanilla 3/3 creature. So that's that. That is my deck tech for my Titania Protector of Argoth EDH deck. Again, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you guys enjoyed this deck tech for Titania. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. You know, tell me what you think of my deck. If there are any cards that you would suggest that I put in, that I take out. You know, how you feel about the overall theme and, you know, purpose of the deck. You know, let me know. I really do love to hear your guys' suggestions and your comments. Your constructive criticism. You know, whatever it may be, I really do like to read your guys' comments. So, by all means, leave me a comment in the comment section below the video and let me know what you think of my Titania deck. But yeah, this has been Jay with Tap and Turn Gaming. Again, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll catch you later. Thanks a lot.